Hey there, this is Chuck with LYTE Gaming, and today we're going to be building the LYTE Reaper build kit. Now this video will be more specifically tailored to this build kit, so if some parts are different, then don't panic, because they should all go in a similar fashion, and if you ever get stuck, you can always reach out to our tech support. Before we get started, I want to mention that there's also some great tutorials out there for building a PC, and while we always try to be as thorough as we can with these build kit videos, if you feel like you're maybe uncomfortable still building it beforehand, you can always do some more research, and I'll put some pictures on the screen of some of those videos. This video will cover getting your PC assembled, tips on cable management, loaded with Windows. This kit comes with a Ryzen 7 5700G, 32 gigs of RAM at 3200 megahertz, an RTX 3080 GPU. It'll all be going into this Metallic Gear NeoCube case in the white option. So to get started, you can pretty much move everything to the side except for your motherboard, CPU, and RAM. But go ahead and get your motherboard box unpacked. I usually just leave all the manuals in with the box, and then I take that back to make the box more rigid. We're gonna use the box as an anti-static workbench. When you're handling your motherboard, just be super careful. Just don't grab any connectors. You can, grab the edges and kind of finesse it out of the bag. So first thing we're gonna do is install your CPU. So take it out of your plastic. So you see the indents there, so you wanna grab the sides of the CPU itself and finesse it out of the packaging, trying not to touch the actual die on top. And then down on the motherboard, you can see at the top left of the socket there's a cutout triangle there. That corresponds with the gold triangle on the CPU. So that means that the orientation should go like this. So you can raise this little retention arm, and then you gently with the sides just kind of lower down the CPU. I always give it a slight wiggle just to make sure that it fell into place correctly, and then you can visibly inspect all around it to make sure that it is seated into the socket correctly, nothing's hanging over. Once you confirm that it is in the socket, you can go ahead and lower this arm. And it sits just like that. Now we're gonna install the RAM, so go ahead and unbox that. Just be careful when you open it so they don't fall out of the case. You can just grab them right by the heat spreader. Just be sure not to touch the teeth at the bottom there. So if you look at the RAM stick, you can see that there's an indent in the bottom of the teeth there, and it's off center a little bit on one side. So the RAM stick will only go in one way, and you can see the corresponding indent on the DIMM slot itself. And since this is a quad channel configuration compatible motherboard, see on the bottom there, so that is the markings for the RAM config. So if you're doing a dual channel, you need to use DIMM B2 and DIMM A2 marked by the asterisk there. So to get started, it's pretty simple. They kind of outlined it with the lighter colored DIMMs anyway. So you just push the tab back on the top. This one on the bottom is stationary, so you can line up, make sure it's vertical. You can hold the stick up to see if the little notch lines up correctly, but once it's down vertically, you can just push it with both your fingers on either end, and you should hear it click into place. So you can do that for the other one. And your RAM is successfully installed. Now for the LYTE cooler, we can't use the stock bracket here for the cooler. So I'm just gonna go ahead and go around and unscrew these two sides. Now you wanna keep these to the side in case you ever need to switch your cooler and you need to use the default mounting hardware. So you can keep these in your motherboard box, is a good place, I recommend. You can lift the motherboard by one of these heat sinks, but I just slid out the stock backplate. So you can keep this to the side or in your motherboard box as well. We have to do some prep with our LYTE cooler. Let's go ahead and take the remote and the brackets out of it, unbox this whole cooler. So we'll put that off to the side. We're just gonna need the bracket for now. So with this piece, there's two sides of it. This side is the Intel and this side is the AMD. So we're gonna be using the AM4 mounting hole on all four corners. So in this bag with the yellow tips, we'll need some hardware out of that. We're gonna need this hardware, so the black AMD tabs, and then all four of these You put one of the standoffs in the AM4 hole, and it should drop into place once it is sitting correctly. So you put one of those on, and then you put one of the AMD caps on it. And then now you have a standoff on that corner. So do that to all 4 corners. And when you're done, it should look like this. Just gonna lift the motherboard by a safe spot again. You can line it up carefully. Hold the back of it so that it stays in place, and then as you lower the motherboard down, you can just use the gravity to hold it. Just be careful while you're setting your board down. So I find it easier to mount the pump to the motherboard before putting it into the case. I take these twist ties off to make putting it in the case a little easier so you don't have to take them off later. So you want to take this plastic cover off. Be really careful to the pre-applied thermal paste. Just be careful to not touch that. And obviously, since this is an AMD system, we're gonna need the 2 AMD brackets. So on the top and bottom of the mounting pump, the side that doesn't say AMD is the side that'll be flat towards the CPU. So it just goes into this little channel. And then from the underside, you're gonna screw the bracket on through the 4 corner holes. Do the same for the other side. Flip it 180. Careful not to touch the thermal paste. Goes right in the channel. AMD label facing up. And then just go back over all 4 of those to make sure that they are seated down properly. So we got our bracket seated down nicely onto the 240mm AIO pump. It doesn't show up that well on camera, but when you hold up the pump vertically, you'll see our LYTE logo, and you just want to make sure that that lines up straight. Set your cooler off to the side so it's not going to tip over. We got our motherboard box again. So basically how I'm going to do this is I'm going to leave what I'm actually going to do is get this card or this foam under it just to have another piece of protection. So that's from the actual all-in-one cooler box. So how we're going to mount this is, so we're going to need these big screws with the spring, and that's how it keeps tension down to the actual mounting bracket down there. So while being sure to pay attention to the radiator that you're not damaging it, you can start to lower down your pump, and we're gonna lightly thread on 1 corner just to keep it in place. And then we're gonna lightly thread on the other opposing corner. And at this point it's sturdy enough to let go. So I'm gonna get my other 2 sides in. So I turned the whole thing to the side so that you can see what I'm doing. We're going to tighten this down in a crisscross pattern. So this bottom right one will get a few turns, go to the top left, do a few turns, and then just keep alternating until they're tight enough. So that'll ensure that your thermal paste spreads out evenly. So then at the end, just go around 1 more time, make sure they're all snug, double check your work. You can see how I have the radiator off to the side here. These cables aren't getting strained, the radiator is not hitting anything, so the fans aren't in danger. So maybe if you have another person on the side to hold this up, since it's maybe your first time doing this, so they can support the radiator while you're attaching the pump. Otherwise, while you're moving this whole unit together, just be wary to not crush this up against anything. So this cable with the 2 closed ends, there's one that will accept a 3-prong or RGB header, and then this one is protecting the pin. This will get routed through the top of the case, so I'm just gonna leave it off to the side ahead. And then this other one is the actual fan header itself. So you can see that there's a channel on it and it'll only go in one way. There's usually a plastic clip that corresponds to it. So you can see on the top there, one labeled CPU fan, and then this one to the right is chassis fan. So those 2 labels correspond to these 2 plugs. This one on the left, there's a black plastic piece on the front, so that corresponds to the little channel on the actual connector itself. So you just slide it on like so. You'll have a chance to clean these cables up later on. So now we're going to install the fans on the radiator before they go into the case. The side of the fan with the black plastic housing and the wires is the side that the air comes through. So in this case, you have the open side that looks a little nicer with the fan, and then the other side has the black plastic, the air will flow like this through it. So just keep note of that for orientation in the case. We're gonna be mounting the radiator roughly like this in the case, and we're gonna be using it as an exhaust. So to show you how it is, it'll be black plastic housing like this up against the radiator. And we also wanna keep note of where these cords are gonna end up once it's in the case. That's why I like to hold it where you think it'll be, and then you can kind of line it up and say, okay, so if it's sitting like this, it'll exhaust air through the radiator, and the fans are the shortest travel to the back of the case to keep the wires looking nice. While I'm adding the fans on, if I were to hold it up normal how it would go, these wires would come out of this side, so that fan would sit like that, and this one would sit like that. We're gonna be using these long screws to mount the fans to the radiator. Now you could do the fans first. It really doesn't matter like the order you do these in. I just find it easier to move the radiator around with less weight on it while you're putting the fan pump on. But say you have a second person to help you out, then they could just hold this all up as a unit, and you can do this ahead of time. Just gonna make sure these are snug. You don't have to go too crazy. Now it is a pain to mount everything in your case and then realize that you have it wrong. So I like to do one more final test. Just gonna little mock it up again. As these are, they'll exhaust through the radiator. So I'm gonna get the case all prepped to get the motherboard in, and there's a few things we can handle before putting parts in that may save some time by not having things in the way. Sometimes these thumb screws are a little tight, so if you need to loosen them with a screwdriver at first, don't be afraid. Untighten, you can take the top off. When you have the top off, you can take the other half top piece off. Once you have the top off, you can take off the side panel glass, the front panel glass, and then also the back of the case panel that's just metal. So on the glass, you can grab it from the bottom and start sliding it up. Grab it with the other hand and be careful. I would recommend like leaning it against a wall or somewhere where you know it's not gonna tip over. Same thing with the front panel, and then same thing with the back panel. We're gonna take our accessories box out of here. That's this little twist tie. While we're already back here, I'm going to undo our drive bay. So it's these two screws at the top, and then this whole piece can slide back and up to remove it. These are all your front panel connectors, so these will go to your Bluetooth, HD audio, and your front panel power switch and stuff like that, but we will get back to that. So these are the screws included with your LYTE fans. They have a pretty wide threading on them, so these will actually cut into the plastic of the fan while you mount them. So we just need, so included, you should have about 12 of them for the 3 included LYTE Tech fans. So yeah, these fans will go in from the front side and then sit against these mounting holes. So the black bracket you saw earlier is blowing into the case this way. So then the cool air is coming in, hot air is going out the top. I zoomed in so you can see. So I basically kind of just pull the wire to keep it taut from the front. And it'll just kind of sit nicely. So you can line up this bottom hole. You want to mount it like as low as you can, just to keep in mind that you're going to be installing the other 3 fans above it, but it's not a really big pain if you want to move them around later and get the fitment correct. But I'm just going to go ahead and screw all 4 screws of these in. See, like these top ones didn't really line up that great once I did the bottom ones. You can see that the top ones didn't line up that great, so we're going to lightly unscrew the bottom just to give us some movability, and now it should be pretty lined up. Now I can retighten the bottom, and I'm going to repeat this for the other 3 fans. So now you got all 3 fans mounted up as intakes. Actually, while we have this back piece off, I'm going to go ahead and install our drives ahead of time. For the hard drive, it'll be mounted vertically like this. So first we'll do an SSD. I'm gonna be placing this one a little on the higher side just to kind of ensure it'll be out of the way. So maybe we'll pick like a middle of the way up. So I've just got 1 screw in so that I can demonstrate it for you. It'll be a little bit away from this bigger edge. And if you flip it around, so you'll still be able to plug in your drive to the SATA ports. And then I need to put a screw in these 3 places. This is the screw you'll be using also. Might be a little hard to see, but it's the one with the flat top. This is also a motherboard screw, but for the SSD, it takes this smaller screw. So we got all 4 mounting screws up. You can still plug in the SATA. And then now we'll move on to the hard drive. So there's the silver screw spots on the hard drive. It'll match up to these 2 end ones with the rubber holes. For that, this case includes these screws. So it's a flat top. You know, it's a little bit longer, but it's meant for the drive here. So these go in as you'd expect. You just go through the rubber and right into the drive. There's no real crazy weird thing about these. You just pretty much screw them in. I'm gonna go ahead and elect to not put this into the case yet, just to keep it out of the way and keep the overall case a little lighter. But later on, we're gonna be plugging in the SATA connector to the small ones, and then they'll get a SATA power from the power supply. So next thing you wanna do is get your IO shield out of the motherboard box. We're gonna put this in the case, so we're prepping it to install the motherboard right now. So the 3 dots at the bottom of this are the audio ports, and that's always on the bottom. So that's how you know the orientation for going into the case. You can also kind of match it up with your motherboard and just double check. This is how it should be going in. You can also see that there's a ridge. So the case will go over the ridge, and then this will sit flush to the back of the case against the motherboard. So it goes in this orientation in the case. So line it up. You can give it a push from the back on a corner, kind of keep pushing it and trying to be even with it, pushing the corners, and you'll hear it snap into the case. And now your IO shield is installed correctly. I wanted to point out these mounting points, 3 on the bottom, 3 in the middle, and 3 on top. I wanted to point these out because it's easier to install the motherboard with the case laying flat, and I figured it'd be easier to show you exactly where the mounting points are. So pretty much before a case install, you want to verify that you have mounting points and all the points that you're going to screw the motherboard down to. And in this case, they're already there, so we don't have to screw with them. So I'm gonna go ahead and lay the case flat, and we're gonna get the motherboard installed. So I just wanted to point this out that I'm using the 240mm box to support the radiator while I screw down the motherboard. So just because it's kind of a tall case, I'm going to be resting the radiator here while I screw the motherboard in. I took out this dust shield just so that you can see what I'm doing with it. So how it's going to work is that I'm holding the CPU pump, and then I'm holding the radiator, and we're going to be lowering the motherboard at an angle in like this slightly while we line it up with the standoffs. So we're coming in at an angle, just kind of making sure that our IO ports line up correctly. We're mostly there. Just gonna put the radiator to the side so it can rest. Okay, so now that you got the motherboard laid into the case and resting on the standoff, now we can kind of start to adjust it. This is the motherboard screw. It's the fine thread one with the flat top, so this is the same that we used on the SSD, and we're gonna be installing it into these standoffs. So the technique I do is I kind of adjust it by pushing on the edge of the board very carefully. So see, I just lined up that middle one there. Now I'm gonna zoom in for you. So with that middle hole, we can very slightly adjust it, and we're gonna get a screw in on that point. But we're not gonna fully tighten it down. Now I'm gonna make sure that this one's lined up on the right side, and it looks like it is. So I'm gonna gently screw that one in, not tightening it down. So you can see this one on the top kind of needs to be pushed in a little bit. Again, be gentle, but I don't want you to be freaked out that you're gonna break anything. Is that one up in the top corner? Looks like it's lined up pretty well. Screw it down. Pretty much we'll just repeat this with all of the motherboard screws. But you don't wanna fully tighten them down until the end. And now your motherboard is installed. We can take this LED cable from the all-in-one cooler and put it through the rubber grommet in the top of the case here. Pull it through the rest of the way from the other side. So I went ahead and took the twist tie off of these cables, and we're gonna go ahead and mount the cooler how we were already thinking, like that. While we kind of get the radiator into place, we're going to be guiding these cables out the back of the case. So we're pushing all these cables to the grommet. So now that you got that getting lined up, while I'm holding it up, I'm gonna reach around the side of the case and just get those cables extra out of the way, make sure we're not pinching anything. So that's the screw we're gonna be using. It's kind of like this silver hexagon one that came with the radiator. So it's the opposite of the long screws, and we are just gonna hold it up with one hand while we screw in the radiator with the other on all 8 of those spots. And then just go around one last time to verify you tightened them all down well. And your cooler is now installed. One thing I forgot to mention before installing this CPU cable is that you can double back it on itself to shorten the total cable length, and then it'll kind of look a little bit nicer in the case. So I usually imagine I'm gonna have like a little piece sticking out, and then you wanna fold it around itself a little bit. And then again, I'm using a twist tie from one of the cables in the case previous. You can also just use one of the zip ties that came with your case. But now, as you can see, it's a little bit more of a tighty connection. Okay, so I just routed a couple things from your front panel to the front to show you how to plug those in. So this is all in that bundle in the back of the case that looked all nice. So this is your USB 3.0 header on the right side of your motherboard by your RAM. There is a little indent missing in the connector, and then that corresponds with the little nub on the 3.0 connector. So it would plug in like this orientation. And all you have to do is slide it on straight and push until you hear the click. So that right there is your audio connector, and then you should see one labeled HD audio, and that connector has one of the pins blocked off kind of in towards the middle, and that corresponds with one of the missing pins on the audio connector. So it obviously only goes on one way. So just line up the one that's blocked off with the pin that's missing, and this will just slide right on. And then this area is your front panel connectors. And if you're ever questioning where to put something on them, there is a little diagram on the bottom of the motherboard. There's 4 pins on top, and then there's 1 missing pin on the top right, and then the bottom has 5 pins. So bottom 2 pins are positive hard drive LED and minus hard drive LED. Bottom right 2 pins are reset. Top left 2 pins are power LED, and then the top right 2 pins are power switch. With that being said, I already linked these to the front of the case. Hard drive LED and reset switch, and plug those in. So take note, on the hard drive LED, there's a plus on the right side here. So the connector is gonna go upside down. This slides right on. Reset switch can go on right next to it. And then your power switch goes above the reset switch. In this particular case, we don't have a power LED plus and minus. So just make sure those are all the way down. And if you go to test your PC for the first time and it doesn't power on, I would go check these connectors to make sure that your switch is wired up. And that's it for the front panel, but while we are right here, I'm gonna plug in our SATA cables for the drives. So it should look like this from your motherboard. One of them has a right angle connector like this, and I'll be using this one for the hard drive. And then the other side just has 2 straight connectors. You can see on the right side of your board, you have 2 connectors. One is labeled SATA_1, one is labeled SATA_2. We're gonna plug the flat end, we're gonna plug the only flat cable into the top number 1. That'll be for your boot drive or your SSD. That's the 512 gig one. And then the one with the right angle connector, we're gonna plug the flat end of it into number 2. And then you can route both of these out of one of the grommets of the case towards the back. So now that's all nice and tidy. So I'm gonna actually get the power supply in now. So I already kind of used one of the twist ties to connect all of our cables for the all-in-one cooler. So I can put that over the top of the case and get it out of the way. And then you have your 2 SATA cables for your drives once the drive piece is on this middle part. And then the rest of your front panel, we're gonna have to route our RGB from the coolers to this header. And then we're gonna give power to this SATA power connector. It's like the big L with the gold underneath. So we're gonna go ahead and get our power supply in now. Now this next part may be different for you if you just happen to not get a fully modular power supply with your kit. At the very time of recording, this is the 750 watt we include. It's an 80 plus gold Corsair RM750X. So in the case that you don't have a fully modular one, you won't have to plug any cables in now, and you'll just put your power supply in. But for the modular one, you just want to think about what we have to plug in. So I'm going to go in the cable bag. So I'm actually going to do 2 SATA connectors, 1 Molex connector, the PCIe for the graphics card, so we'll need 2 of these 8 pins, the motherboard, and then a CPU power. On the power supply itself, it's all labeled for you, so it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm just going to go ahead and get everything plugged in. So to go one more rundown on the cords, this is with it all plugged in. So we got SATA connectors, the other Molex, and 1 plug-in for the GPU, since we need only 2 8 pins. This motherboard has a spot for one 8-pin and one 4-pin on the CPU, so I went ahead and plugged in 2 CPU connectors, and then you just have your motherboard plugged in. So this is the orientation of the power supply you want to have. You want the fan to be over here because on the back panel there's actually some mesh that'll let the power supply breathe. In this way that it's currently at, it'll pull air in and blow air out the back. And it just rests in there. All you have to do is pop it in. You get your 4 utility screws from the power supply bag. And then it looks kind of like the radiator mounting screws we used. It's like the more thick top, and you just want to port your power supply so you can start threading in some stuff. You'll kind of see a theme with building PCs is that you mostly don't screw everything down until it's in place. Double check your work, be gentle, be confident. Not a ton you can mess up though putting in a power supply. You just screw it in on the 4 holes in the back. And now you have your power supply mounted. So what I'm gonna do already in the back here is these 3 connectors that were for Sata peripherals. We're gonna kind of pull to the side a little bit. And then this motherboard one, we're gonna push through the main middle grommet here. So that'll get plugged right into the 24 pin. And then your CPU connectors, we can route towards the top right of the case from the back here. So pretty self-explanatory, you just put everything where it needs to go. And it's best to put, best to have the quickest route to the actual connector itself, just for best look. Then the PCIe one, we're gonna be putting in from the bottom. So I'm gonna snake that through the bottom there and grab it from the other side. Now we're just gonna go ahead and start getting things plugged in. So we already routed the motherboard cable pretty close to it. You'll notice there's a lip on one side that corresponds to the clip on the 24 pin connector. So you can see there's that little clip there. The clip goes over the little ridge that's on the connector. So we're just gonna get that twisted around a little bit. Again, don't try to force it, but you're gonna have to probably be a little bit firm to get these cables to bend how you want them. And then once it's in place, you'll hear the click. So as you can see up top there, those are your 2 CPU connectors. And then we routed 2 of them from the modular power supply. So actually with these connectors, they slide apart. So you can turn the 8 into 2 4s. So we're gonna head and take this 8, and just like the motherboard, it has that the little ridge on it, so it only clicks in one way, and we're just going to get that plugged in. So it may take some finessing, but once you get them, they should be fully seated down in their respective power connections. This may also be a little bit easier with the radiator out of the case. So if real need be, you can just unscrew the mounting points and reattach it once you have all the power connectors on. Or since it's a modular power supply, you could connect the CPU cables first, route it to the back, and then go forward with your stuff. But I always wire at the end, so that's why it's in this order. For installing the GPU, we need to use the topmost PCIe 16X slot, which happens to be the most fancy looking one on this Asus board. So we're gonna pop that tab backwards, and then we need to remove the PCI placeholders that correspond with how big the card is. So our 3080 is a 2-slot card. So we're just gonna follow that back. It's gonna be this second one and this third one. So just go ahead and unscrew those. Once you unbox your card, you can remove it from the beautiful packaging. So we can take off this rubber stopper from the PCI port. So pretty much how we're gonna be handling this is going into the case, and it's gonna line up with these slots in the back, and it's gonna click into this one that you push the tab down on. So we're gonna line it up carefully. Seems to be going well, lined up good. Now once it's in the PCI slot with the teeth and lined up with the back of the case, you can kind of give it some pressure, and you'll see it click into place like that. So now once it's clicked into place, we're gonna replace the 2 screws from the placeholders, and we're gonna support the GPU with my left hand, so we're gonna give it some vertical resistance while we screw these in. That'll help combat GPU sag. So we got that bottom one in, gotta get this top one in. Once those are pretty tight. We already routed the PCI cables from underneath earlier, so you can just get those in order. They click in the same way as the rest of the connectors. So we got one 8-pin power. We're gonna make one more 8-pin, and then we're gonna get that one plugged in. So now we are pretty much almost done with our computer build. We're just gonna have to wire it up, get the fans all connected. We're going to install the drive bay real quick, get all those connectors in, then we'll cable manage it and be on our way. Okay, so now you got your graphics card installed. We're gonna flip the case around and get your drives plugged in. So we're just gonna connect that like so, and then your SSD will take the other cable. So with those both in there. So this whole drive bay kind of goes down and then over a little bit on the bottom feet. We're just gonna screw in the top 2 screws here. Just like how we plugged in those SATA connectors, we have the SATA power to plug in. So I'm gonna take one SATA power, put that on the SSD. Now pretty much all we have left to cable manage. You're looking for this connector off of your front panel, so it'll take in 3 pins of an RGB header. You'll need to send power through this connector as well, which is part of your front panel. So this will power your RGB for the fans and the case strip in the front, and then also the cooler when they're all connected. But for now, you just need this. So here's the jumble of AIO Cooler stuff from earlier. So now in the back, loose, you should have these RGB headers with the 3 holes. You should have at least 3 of them. And then you'll have 2 fan connectors, just like the CPU one we plugged in earlier with the ridge on it. And then in the included bag, you should have a 2 fan to 1 fan connector adapter plug. So you're gonna plug in the 2 all-in-one cooler fans into that, and that'll give the ability to control both those fans with 1 header piece. As for the RGB, we're just gonna take the 3-prong RGB header and then just pretty much daisy chain them to each other. So you'll see where the arrows line up, just make sure it's connected. Take the protector off of the other one, daisy chain it to that one, make sure the arrows line up on the piece. So now you should have 2 cables connected to each other, and then that is gonna go to the RGB header that I showed you a little bit ago. That's the 3 connector. So now that's together, just gonna bunch that up, put that in the back there. I'm gonna give so this is Chuck from the future, but I forgot to plug in this RGB header. So when you daisy chain all the RGB, you'll get this rectangular piece that needs to be powered by a SATA connector. It's in the same bag as the RGB remote for your LYTE cooler. So we are gonna stash this away now that it's plugged in. I'm gonna give the power connector down here power with the extra SATA power cables we have plugged in. So I'm just gonna give this power right here, plug that in. I'm gonna hide the rest of these behind the drive bay, so we're just gonna stuff those in there. So I'm actually gonna take that cable management mount and put a zip tie around it. And then I'm gonna zip tie all this RGB stuff over to the side. Okay, so we are nearing completion with your build. So this cable that joins the 2 fans from the all-in-one cooler just to a singular header, we are going to feed that back through the top grommet there, so we can plug that in next to where you have the CPU fan plug-in. And then I'm gonna go ahead and wire up these LYTE fans. So you'll get this included controller, and you pretty much just have to plug things into it and then give it power where there is a red connection. So it'll be labeled fan 1 through 6. You're just gonna take the connector and plug it in. Pretty straightforward, just like the rest of the PC. Pretty much everything just goes in one way and like kind of hard to mess up. So we got our fan controller with all 3 of our LYTE fans plugged in, and then in that red slot, we're gonna plug in the included power cable right in the red slot. And then this will go to a Molex connector from your power supply that we plugged in earlier. So it should look like that in the end. So at the moment, we kind of have it around this drive thing. So I'm gonna unplug the power from the fan controller, and then I'm just gonna feed that to the other side of this drive bay. So now it's out of the way. I'm just gonna kind of bundle up the cables a little bit, get that out of the way. Now with some cases, it's very necessary to cable manage. With others, it just naturally gets tucked out of the way a little bit better. On this one, this is one of the ones that just kind of hides your cables naturally. So the cable management is mostly up to personal preference after this point. After you got everything plugged in, you can maybe like bunch some of this together, grab a random zip tie, just trying to bunch together like as big of a bundle of cords. So right there, like in the grand scheme of things, it didn't really clean things up too much because you're not going to see this part of the case. But I'm going to go ahead and do a test fit on this because you can see that our SATA cable protrudes a little bit just because of how it naturally landed in the case. So if this bugged you, that this is right here, you could physically move the SSD higher up. Just in my case, I just chose to use this one while I was filming. So obviously you can move it around. This is where we're gonna plug in that the 2 fan to 1 fan header, and it's gonna go right next to our CPU fan. Get that little cord out of the way. So now you can see both of the CPU fan and the all-in-one cooler fans are plugged in properly. So now you just have to go do a little once over on your PC and make sure you have your PCIe power plugged in snug, your motherboard power, everything on your front panel IO. Now we're gonna get the panels on the PC and we're gonna go load Windows on it. Okay, so I just put all the panels back on. We're all good to go. I'm gonna bring this over to our stream setup to get plugged in and loaded with Windows. Okay, so I brought you to our stream room so that I can get this on the game capture software to show you what's actually on the screen. I got the HDMI cord for the monitor, the power, keyboard and mouse plugged in, and I'm gonna actually fire it up for the first time on camera. I actually have not tested if it will power on to get the real experience. If your power supply switches on O, then it will not get any power. You want to make sure it's clicked to the line. I'm going to go ahead and hit the power button in the front. We're going to see if this turns on. So far so good. Will the cooler turn on? So good news, our PC is booting. I'm going to go get our RGB controller. So we got good news that the PC posts up and everything, but I'm going to go ahead and fix the RGB real quick. But I forgot to plug in this RGB header. So when you daisy chain all the RGB, you'll get this rectangular piece that needs to be powered by a SATA connector. It's in the same bag as the RGB remote for your LYTE cooler. So we are gonna stash this away now that it's plugged in. And we are gonna get loaded up with Windows. Okay, so after our test boot, I got the RGB for the all-in-one cooler all handled. I'm actually gonna take off the peel. You'll get a USB with the Windows Media Creation tool on it so you can install Windows. So we are just gonna put that into a USB 3 port. It really doesn't matter which one you do on the back. And then we are gonna boot this up and get some Windows on. Now you can see our LYTE cooler just comes on right away. So that's all fixed up. Since your PC hasn't gotten a boot drive yet, when you have the USB in, it should just automatically get you to where you can install Windows, since it's the only bootable media. So we're just gonna hit next, install now. I don't have a product key, it's fine for now. If you do, you could input it there, but you can always just hit I don't have one and then install it later, which is what I'm gonna do here. There's not much differences between Home and Pro that the average person would really notice. I like doing Pro because the taskbar is dark by default, but we're just gonna do Home because that's the standard. You gotta accept the license, hit next. And then when you get to this screen, you're gonna have to hit Custom, Install Windows Only. And now these are your 2 drives here. So if you remember, we have a 500 gig SSD and a 2 terabyte hard drive. We are going to make the boot drive on the SSD so you have quicker load times and your system just functions way better when it's on the solid state drive. So we're going to click the unallocated space here, hit new. It's going to auto default to the maximum it can, hit apply, hit OK. Now you could do this now, but I'm going to leave it unallocated just so I can show you later on in case you forget this step. So it made 3 partitions out of that 1 drive, and then on drive 0 partition 3, which is your bigger size, you're just going to hit next. Okay, and then once it finishes that screen, it should just send you right into a installer. So obviously United States, yes for the US keyboard, skip the other layout. Now this is a step that I do by preference because I don't really like signing in through the Microsoft account that it forces you to do. So I don't have a Wi-Fi card on this motherboard and I don't have the Ethernet hooked up on purpose. And I'm gonna hit I don't have internet, continue a limited setup, and then I'm gonna just name this admin. But obviously, if you wanted to put your own Microsoft account on this is going to be your personal computer, so that's obviously no big deal. It just is an extra step of having to sign in. and I don't want to put my personal Microsoft account on this demo PC. So I'm doing the limited setup with no internet, doing admin, hitting next, and I don't want a password, so I'm gonna hit enter again. And then for all this stuff, I personally hit no on all of it, but it is really up to you. I just like turning all this off because it's mostly just diagnostic data and stuff. We're going to hit not now for Cortana, and we should land on the Windows desktop when we're done. And at this point, you have successfully built your own computer, and we can go ahead and do a few things. So I'm gonna get our Ethernet cable plugged in, and here is just like a quick few things that you can do that I recommend for your PC. So now that we got the Wi-Fi installed, something that I pointed out when I was installing the drives is that I left the hard drive unallocated, and I'm going to show you how to enable it if you forgot it on that step. You right click your Windows icon, there's a disk management section. You can also search that in the bar, but I'm going to go ahead and hit disk management. And then it'll automatically have this pop-up since there's a device that is not initialized. So say that pop-up isn't there, you can see that this hard drive, this big unallocated, is the one that we didn't do anything with. In this case, we have to right-click on this disk 1 box, hit initialize disk. Pretty much you want to leave all of the options that it auto-selects for you as is. So we're just going to hit OK. It's going to get initialized. You want to right-click the big box down here, new simple volume. Next, next. You can change the letter if you want. I'm gonna leave it as D and hit next. And then obviously leave all this the same. The one thing you can change is the drive label. So I'll just put HDD to make sure I know that it's a hard drive when you're viewing it in the File Explorer. Then hit next and finish. So now that should finish up. And if you were to go to your File Explorer in this PC, you should see that both of your drives are set up accordingly. So now you have your main boot drive, which is your SSD, and then you have your other drive, your hard drive. So now in the future, if you wanted to install games onto your hard drive, you can right click, make a new folder, games, and then when you're going to install the actual game, there'll be a drop down where you can select the location and you need to guide it to your hard drive. Now what there is left to do is right click your Windows icon, go to settings, we're gonna go down to update and security. And you can see that it is trying to get some updates right now that our internet is up to par. It looks like it already grabbed the graphics driver through Windows Update. So you pretty much want to install all of this. And after that, you're pretty much set up to get gaming. I would recommend downloading Steam, and I would download, since you have an NVIDIA card, I would recommend getting the GeForce Experience. When you make an account and look on there, it'll show you whenever there's a brand new graphics card driver to install. So that kind of makes it a little bit simplified. I would just check your Windows updates every now and then, and you should be on your way gaming. So I hope you guys enjoyed the LYTE Reaper build kit video. If you have any questions, always reach out to our tech support. We are open Monday through Friday at 10:30 to 5, and we can get you scheduled out with a technician if you ever get stuck. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching.